Sometimes in art history, we see artists popping up in multiple places because they work in different movements, which really can't be all dealt with at one time unless we're doing an anthology of simply one artist. And here we come across Picasso again. Now, we dealt with him in Cubism, but he is still a relevant artist all the way up until his death in the 1970s. Now, Picasso took on socialist and communist ideals during the Spanish Civil War, so we're dealing with a period of time immediately before World War II, although some historians consider the Spanish Civil War as sort of the start of the Second World War, and we're definitely dealing with similar themes. So, Picasso's international reputation also probably saved him when Paris was invaded by the Germans in 1940. Although he's under surveillance, he was allowed to continue with his work because the Germans basically feared what would happen if they were to arrest him and send him to one of the camps. His paintings reflect the grim reality of the occupation, and he will, after the Spanish Civil War and after World War II, focus much of his attention on war. For example, this piece, which is depicting a massacre during the Korean War. But of course, most famously, he paints Guernica. Now, there's a little history behind this. In 1937, the Spanish Republican government will ask Picasso to paint a mural for the Spanish pavilion of the Universal Exhibition that year in Paris, basically a smaller version of the World's Fair. Inspiration for it will come in April of 1937 in the form of a horrific aerial bombing by the fascists of the town of Guernica. And so he's going to create a painting depicting a massacre of innocents in black and white tones. And he's picking black and white tones because they're reminiscent of newspapers at the time, as well as newsreels, which are all in black and white. And filled with historical and political allusions and expressive force. This painting will become an icon and really sort of the last real history painting that we see, the last great history painting that we see in the 20th and 21st centuries. Now, this is painted as an immediate reaction to the Nazis' devastating casual bombing practice on the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. So what's going to happen here, just to give you a bit of history, is the Germans are fighting on the side of the Spanish nationalists, of the fascists. And the Germans are testing a lot of new war equipment. They're testing their new aircraft and new ideas. And so we're going to see this idea that, hey, let's do aerial bombardment. Now, aerial bombardment was something that was tried in World War I, but to limited success. The planes couldn't carry much in the way of explosives. They tried using Zeppelins. That didn't work out real well. So they're trying to use these new planes, which are faster, they're more efficient, and they can carry a much greater bomb load. So what happens is during the day, in April of 1937, these German aircraft, Heinkel 111s, will fly over the town of Guernica and start bombing the town. They're not bombing a military installation. They're trying to bomb the civilians. The idea being if you can cause the civilians to suffer, they will pressure the government to stop the war. That's the idea. But as we learned in World War II, it doesn't work. But it is particularly horrific because it is the first time that we're seeing this intentional attack. It's not even an attempt to say there's a military target. They're intentionally attacking a civilian population. That is what's going to set Picasso off. And remember, he's a Spanish artist living in France, so it's got a certain importance in his mind. Now, this work has gained an absolutely monumental status. It has become a perpetual reminder of the tragedies of war, an anti-war symbol and an embodiment of peace. In fact, we find Guernica today at the United Nations. The mural's two dominant elements, the bull and the horse, are said, or one art historian says, that the bull and the horse are important characteristics of Spanish culture. Now, Picasso himself certainly used these characters to play many different roles over time. This has made the task of interpreting the specific meaning of the bull and the horse particularly difficult. Now, when we look at it, this is meant to be a massive piece, and you get an idea of scale here, how large this really is. And it's supposed to be large. It's supposed to fill your vision. You can think of nothing more than the suffering that you see in this piece. But let's look into some of the elements of the piece. Now, some critics warn against trusting the political message in Guernica. For instance, the rampaging bull, a major motif of destruction here, has previously figured whether as a bull or a minotaur as Picasso's ego. Now, in the past, he's used it as that symbol, sort of this depiction of the ego. But here, the bull or the minotaur is particularly disturbing. It looks like it might be involved in the actual conflict, causing some of the pain that's going on. After all, this bull is immediately behind a woman who's clearly screaming and holding a dead child in the foreground right in front of her. It's all set up in a cubist style, but we definitely can see what's going on. Now, in this instance, the bull probably represents the onslaught of fascism. Picasso said that it meant brutality and darkness, presumably the reminiscent of his prophetic work, because of course this is done before World War II, but it could so speak to that war as well. He also states that the horse represents the people of Guernica, these people who are suddenly being attacked, and you can see the horse is suffering. As we look at the image and what's going on, we see parts of people. Now, an aerial bombardment is going to leave pieces of people, not whole people. So we see this person where here's their head and their arm dismembered. They're holding a sword as if they wanted to defend themselves, but they couldn't. Because how do you defend against a 500-pound bomb falling from the sky? We see people over here on the right screaming in pain and agony as not only do you deal with the detonation, but possibly the fires and other destruction that happens afterwards. Here we see someone running through the streets, clearly injured. If you look at the leg, it gives you the sense of dragging this leg that may be partially amputated along behind you. It's dead weight, quite literally. The horse is fractured, as if the horse is trauma itself. Remember when we looked at Max Beckmann, Night, that image of the war, World War I, and its devastation in the home? This horse is divided in the same way, that sort of idea of trauma being a fractured memory, not one that we're going to see in a beautiful, singular narrative. We see lights going on, but the attack happens during the day. However, to him, he's trying to cast light on the event. So we see the image of light, an image of Picasso saying, hey, the world needs to look at this, needs to focus on Guernica, on what happened and how horrific this is, that you have people dying in this way. It's a reminder of what's happening, and it's trying to call attention to what's happening, because the world as a whole is not paying attention to the Spanish War, to the Spanish Civil War, not in the way that Picasso wants them to, and he's afraid that the Germans will get away with it and that this will be acceptable. He's hoping that his painting will change that. And we still have World War II. So arguably it changes nothing. But yet it becomes a powerful reminder of just how horrific war can be, especially in this new form of war we see in World War II, where we start attacking civilian populations.